They say the weak are sent to die so the strong do not have to watch. In the Hollowfrost Pack, they said it the way other packs said prayers, low and certain, and they said it about a girl named Wren Ashdown. On the coldest night of the worst winter anyone could remember, that girl knelt in the snow beside a great black wolf. He was dying in a poacher's trap. She pressed her own warm hands to his bleeding throat, and she had no idea at all that she was holding a king. But that comes later. First you must understand how a girl learns to believe she is nothing. You must understand the word they used for her. They used it so often it stopped sounding like a wound. It started sounding like a name. The word was disposable. Wren had heard it since she was small enough to hide under the meeting hall benches. The disposable one. Send the disposable one. If we lose the disposable one, we lose nothing. It was said in front of her, and over her, and around her. They spoke of her the way you might speak of a cracked bowl you had not yet thrown out. By the time she was grown, she had stopped flinching at it. That was the worst part, she thought, on the nights she let herself think. Not the cruelty. The way the cruelty had become ordinary. She was the lowest omega of a low and hungry pack. The Hollowfrost lands sat at the cruel far edge of the Alpha King's northern territories. There the pines grew black and close. The snow came early and stayed late, and the king's protection thinned to almost nothing. Here the world forgot the king, and the king half forgot the world. The strong took what they wanted, the weak took what was left. Wren took very little. She lived at the edge, in a shed that had once held grain and now held her. The boards had warped apart and let the wind walk straight through. There was no hearth, only a tin pan, where she burned what wood she could gather without being accused of stealing it. In the deepest cold she slept in her clothes, in her one threadbare blanket, with her arms wrapped around the only warm thing she owned. That warm thing was her brother. Wren Ashdown was 9 winters old. He could not hear, and he had never once shifted into a wolf. In a pack that measured worth in fangs and dominance, those two facts together made him less than nothing. A wolfless, ear-dead Omega's brother. Delavane, the head Omega, had said it more than once. She said it where Bram could see her mouth, even if he could not hear it. The boy was a waste of the food he ate. Wren had learned to step between her brother and that woman's lips, so he could not read the words. She had learned a great many things to keep him from knowing how the pack saw him. She had taught herself the hand speech that let them talk in the dark and the quiet. She taught him that the cold was an adventure, that the hunger was a game, that the long hours she was gone were nothing to fear. She gave him the larger share of every scrap and told him she had eaten already. He was the only creature in the world who looked at her as though she were worth something, and she would have walked into the heart of the killing winter to keep that look on his face. She did not yet know how soon she would have to. Their mother had been an Omega too, gentle and overlooked. She had died of a fever 2 winters back, with Wren's hand in hers. At the end she pulled Wren close. She pressed her cracked lips to her daughter's ear, and she whispered something that made no sense at all. "You are more than they let you be," she had said. "There is a moon in your blood, Wren. When the cold comes for you, do not bow to it. Bow to no one." Then she was gone. There was no one left to explain what the words meant, so Wren folded them away, the way she folded away her mother's only good thing, a grey wool shawl, thin as a breath. She kept it wrapped around Bram's shoulders on the worst nights. The words and the shawl were all she had of the woman who had loved her. She took both out only in the dark. The pack did not love her. The pack used her. She rose before light. She slept after dark. In between, she did the work no one else would touch. She broke the ice on the water holes with raw, splitting knuckles. She hauled the dead game the hunters were too proud to carry. She scrubbed the meeting hall floor on her knees while warriors stepped over her as though she were a stain in the wood. When the privies froze, she was the one sent to dig them clear. Her hands were a map of old labour, the skin cracked and chapped to bleeding. She wrapped them in rags, because no one would give an Omega gloves. Her wolf, when she could feel it at all, was a small and frightened thing. She had shifted late and weak, years after the other young ones. When she did turn, she was undersized and pale and slow, a runt among runts. Her instinct in the face of any raised voice was to drop her eyes and bare her throat and make herself small. The pack read that as weakness. They were not entirely wrong, but it was the weakness of a creature that had been taught every single day of its life that to be seen was to be hurt. So she was not seen. She moved through the pack like weather, like something that happened to the place rather than lived in it. The only one who saw her was Maeve Thorne. Maeve was the pack's old healer, half blind and bent. She was feared a little for the things she seemed to know, and she had a way of looking at Wren that the girl could not explain. Once, binding a burn on Wren's wrist, the old woman turned her hand over to the firelight and went very still. She stared at the thin blue veins as if she could read something written there. She had said nothing. She had only closed Wren's fingers shut gently and held them a moment, and her milky eyes had been wet. Strange old woman, the pack said. Wren had not thought of it again. She did not have the time. There was always wood to gather, ice to break, a brother to keep warm. And then the worst winter in living memory closed its jaws on the Hollowfrost lands. The game vanished. The pack grew hungry, and hungry packs look for someone to send into the cold. They looked at the disposable one. It was Della Vane who brought the order. On the grey afternoon, the storm clouds began to stack in the north. She came to the shed with 2 warriors at her back, her fine fur cloak pulled to her chin. She did not come inside. The inside was beneath her. She stood in the doorway and looked at Wren and Bram, huddled together over the tin pan, and her lip curled. The trap lines need clearing, she said. The far ones, up in the high pines. Wren felt the cold go through her that had nothing to do with the wind. The trap lines were poacher country, 3 hours' hard walk north, a tangle of old snares and pits, left by outlanders who hunted wolves for their silver-priced pelts. Clearing them meant resetting the pack's own snares and springing the poacher's iron, so no Hollowfrost wolf blundered into it. It was done in the worst of winter, alone, with a storm coming, because that was when the poachers were boldest. The last Omega sent to clear them had not come back. They had found her in the spring. That is a death chore, Wren said, very quietly. The words were out before her fear could stop them. Della Vane smiled. I know, she said. And there it was, said plainly, the thing the whole pack believed and only she would say to Wren's face. They wanted her gone. The winter was lean. There was 1 mouth too many. 2, if you counted the deaf boy. And here was a way to be rid of at least one of them and call it duty. Send the disposable one to the traps. If she dies doing something useful. If she lives, she has earned another season of scraps. Wren looked at her brother. He was watching their mouths move and signing, slow and worried. What is wrong? And she made herself smile at him so he would not be afraid. I cannot, she said to Della, the boy. If you do not come back, the head Omega said, we will deal with the boy as we see fit. The threat sat in the cold air between them. Deal with him. A wolfless, ear-dead child in a starving pack, with no one to step between him and the lips that called him a waste. Wren understood then that she had no choice at all. They had known it when they chose her. They always chose her. She was the one with the most to lose and the least power to refuse. She bowed her head. She felt the old shape of it, the throat-baring, the shrinking. I will go, she said. Della Vane turned and left, and her warriors followed. Wren knelt down in front of her brother. She took his cold hands in her ruined ones, and she told him, in the silent language that was only theirs, that she had to go out for the night, that it was only the trap lines, that it was nothing, that she would be home before he woke. He did not believe her. He was 9, and he was deaf, not foolish. He had seen the storm in the north, but he let her lie to him, because that was the gift they gave each other. Then he reached up and unwound their mother's grey shawl from his own shoulders, and he pressed it into her hands. For you, he signed. It is colder out there. She tried to give it back. He would not take it, so she wrapped it twice around her own throat. That thin grey breath of warmth, the last thing her mother had touched. Then she kissed her brother's hair, banked the little fire, and stepped out into the gathering dark. The snow had begun to fall. She walked north into the black pines, a storm at her heels and a death chore ahead of her. She did not know that this was the last night of her old life. She did not know that the cruel, ordinary world that had named her disposable was about to break apart in her raw and bleeding hands. She thought she was walking out to die, the way they meant her to. She made her peace with it the only way she knew. She thought of her brother, safe and warm somewhere behind her, and she hummed under her frozen breath the old Omega lullaby her mother used to sing. The pines closed over her, the light failed, and somewhere ahead of her in the dark, something was waiting, caught in a poacher's trap, dying slowly in the cold. Something that would change everything. She just thought it was a beast no one would miss. The high pines were a different world. Down in the Packlands, the snow at least fell on something familiar. Up here it fell on nothing she knew. It fell on black trunks crowded close as prison bars. It fell on a silence so deep her own heartbeat sounded loud. The trap lines wound through this country, marked by old notches in the bark. She could barely find them under the new snow. She worked them the way she had been told. She sprang the cruel iron jaws of the poacher snares with a forked branch. She reset the pack's smaller traps. Her hands went from cold to numb to a distant aching she could no longer feel. The storm came on. The wind found every gap in her clothes and the grey shawl at her throat. It went through them all. She told herself it was only a few hours more. She told herself Bram was warm. She told herself she would live, though she did not believe it. And she kept moving, because to stop was to freeze. It was full dark when she heard the sound. At first she thought it was the wind or her own mind, gone strange with cold. A low, broken sound rising and falling. She stopped. She listened, and it came again, and it was not the wind. It was something in pain. Every sense she had told her to walk away. A wounded creature in poacher country in a storm was nothing but danger. She had no strength to spare, and no one would ever know if she simply turned and went home and told Della the lines were clear. The disposable one had survived enough by minding only herself. That was the rule of her life. Help no one, because no one helps you. The cold takes the soft, but she could not make her feet carry her away from the sound. She had spent her whole life being the thing nobody came for. She knew exactly what it was to lie somewhere hurt and cold. She knew what it was to be certain no one would turn aside for you. And some stubborn, foolish, unkillable part of her refused. She could not do to another living thing what the whole world had done to her. So she turned toward the crying, and not away from it. She found him in a clearing where the trees fell back. At first the size of him stopped her heart. A wolf, the largest wolf she had ever seen, black as the spaces between the stars. He was easily twice the bulk of the biggest warrior in the Hollowfrost Pack. He lay half sunk in a poacher's pit, one of the deep ones. His foreleg and shoulder were caught in a trap unlike any she had ever seen. Not iron, but silver. Its jaws were bright and wicked in the dark, sunk deep into his flesh. Silver. She understood the cruelty of it at once. Iron would only hold a wolf. Silver poisoned one. Every wolf child was taught to fear the white metal. It was the one thing that could kill their kind slowly and surely, burning in the blood like a sickness. Whoever had set this trap had not wanted a pelt. They had wanted this wolf to die slowly, where no one would find him, and they had nearly gotten their wish. The silver had been in him a long time. She could see it in the black rot creeping up the veins of his leg. She could see it in the foam at his jaws. She could see it in the way his great ribs heaved for each breath, as though the air had grown too heavy to lift. He was dying. He had been dying for a long while, and he had been crying out into the dark for help. Help that, in all the days he had hung here, had never once come, until now, until the disposable one. He smelled her, and his head came up, and his eyes opened. They were the strangest eyes she had ever seen, molten gold, bright as coins. They were full of a pain so deep and so human that she forgot for a moment that she was looking at a beast. He should have snarled. A trapped wolf was a deadly wolf, but he only looked at her, and then slowly, with what little he had left, he stopped fighting the trap and went still, as if to say, "I will not hurt you. Help me, please." Wren knelt at the edge of the pit. There is nothing here for me, she thought. This is a wild thing, a stranger, a beast no one will miss. Helping him will cost me what little I have. It will gain me nothing at all. He cannot thank me. He cannot repay me. He will likely die anyway, and take my strength down into the dark with him. And she reached for the silver trap anyway. The jaws were locked tight, the spring frozen, the metal so cold it burned. She braced her ruined hands against it and pulled. It would not give. She found a fallen branch and worked it into the hinge for leverage. She threw all her small weight against it. Still, it would not give. The wolf made a low sound, not a growl, almost a moan. She felt his breath shudder against her arm. She knew he did not have much time. "You will not die alone," she told him, though he could not understand her. "Not while I am here. No one should die alone. I know that better than anyone." She set her hands on the very jaws of the trap, where the silver would bite her too, and she pulled with everything she had. The trap gave, the jaws sprang, and in the same instant the great weight of the freed wolf shifted and lurched. The heavy lip of the released spring snapped back across her hand. She heard the bones break before she felt them. The pain was white and enormous. She bit down on her own scream so as not to startle him. She cradled her shattered hand against her chest. The world swam. For a long moment she could only kneel there in the snow and breathe through it. 2 fingers and the long bones of the back of her hand, broken clean. The hand she worked with, the hand that gathered the wood and broke the ice and fed her brother. She had given it for a beast, but the wolf was free. He dragged himself out of the pit, the silver fallen away from his ruined leg. He managed 3 steps on the frozen ground. Then his strength failed. He collapsed onto his side in the snow, ribs heaving, the gold eyes already glazing. Free of the trap, yes, but the silver was still in him, deep. The cold was closing in. He had bled too long. Freeing him had not saved him. It had only let him die out of the trap instead of in it. She should have left him then. She had done more than anyone could ask. Her hand was broken. The storm was screaming. Her brother was waiting, and the wolf was as good as gone. Any sensible creature would have turned for home and tried to save her own life. Wren lay down in the snow beside him instead. She did not decide to. Her body simply did it. It curled against the great heaving warmth of him, sharing what little heat she had left, the way she curled around Bram on the coldest nights. With her good hand, she unwound her mother's grey shawl from her throat. It was her last scrap of warmth, the last thing in the world that was hers. She pressed it over the worst of his wounds, over the black rotten flesh where the silver had eaten in, and she held it there. "For you," she whispered, the way her brother had said it to her. "It is colder out there." And then, because it was the only comfort she had ever been given, and the only one she knew how to give, she began to hum. It was the old Omega lullaby, the one her mother had sung over her fevered nights. It had been passed down among the lowest and gentlest of the pack, from a time none of them could remember. It had no grand words. It was a small song, a poor song, a song for nobodies sung to nobodies. But it was warm, and it was hers, and she gave it to the dying wolf the whole night through. She hummed it as the storm broke over them and buried them both. She hummed it when she could no longer feel her hands or her face. She hummed it each time the great gold eyes fluttered and began to close. She called him back from the edge with a tune no king had ever needed and no beggar had ever been denied. She did not know if he could hear it. She did not know if it helped. She only knew she would not let him cross into the dark alone. She knew that dark. She knew its loneliness, and she would spare another creature that, if it was the last thing her broken body ever did. "I am no one," she told him. Somewhere in the longest hour of the night, her voice a thread. "I have nothing. I am no one. There is not a soul in this world who would lie down in the snow for me. But I am here for you. That is the one thing I have to give. So take it. Stay. Just stay until the light." The wolf's breathing slowed and steadied against the warmth of her, the smallest of changes. His gold eyes found hers in the dark and held them. Something passed between them that she had no name for. She told herself it was only the cold making her dream. She told herself a beast could not understand a word she said. She tucked the grey shawl tighter over his wounds. She laid her broken hand over his heart. She hummed the lullaby down into silence, on and on, all through the killing night, certain she was singing a stranger to his death. She had no idea she was singing a king back to life. She woke to warmth, and that alone told her she had died. Wren had never woken warm in her life. Even in the shed, even wrapped around Bram, the cold was always there, at her back, at her feet, waiting. But she woke now with heat all down her side, deep and steady and alive, and she thought, with a strange calm, "So this is what comes after. It is warm here. I am glad." Then she opened her eyes. It was dawn, the grey light just coming up through the snow-laden pines, and she was not dead at all. She was lying in the cleared, trampled snow of the clearing, and the warmth at her side was a man where the wolf had been. She scrambled back on her broken hand. She cried out at the pain of it. She stared. He was enormous, even kneeling, broad as a doorway. His bare shoulders and chest were scarred and corded with strength, the kind she had only seen on the highest warriors. The silver had eaten into the wolf's foreleg. Now a black and angry wound crossed a man's forearm, wrapped in a thin grey shawl, her mother's shawl. His skin was the pale of a long sickness, but the life was coming back into it even as she watched. The black rot of the silver receded from the wound like a tide going out, and his eyes were molten gold, the same gold, the wolf's eyes, in a man's face. He was looking at her the way the wolf had looked at her, as though she were the only thing in the world. She knew then what she had done. Not a beast, not a stray, a shifter, and not just any shifter. No ordinary wolf was that size, that colour, with eyes like struck coins. Some great wolf of some great pack, trapped in his fur by the silver. He could not turn back to a man until the poison loosed its grip. She had spent the night curled against a stranger who could have been anyone, and her first feeling was not wonder. It was the old, trained fear. She had touched her betters. She had lain against one. She braced for the blow. The man spoke. "You stayed," he said. His voice was a ruin, cracked from weeks of silence, from a throat that had howled into too many empty nights. And it was the lowest, plainest thing. No grand pronouncement, no thunder, just two rough words from a man who had not believed anyone would ever come. "You stayed." He said it like the most impossible fact in the world. He said it like a question he already knew the answer to, and could not make himself believe. "All night," he went on, when she could not find her voice, "I felt the cold come for me, and I felt you between me and it. You sang. I do not know your face, but I would know that song in the dark of death itself. You lay down in the snow beside a dying thing. You gave it your warmth, your last cloth, your hand." He looked down at her broken hand, and something moved across his face like grief. "Your hand. You broke your hand to free me." "It was nothing," she whispered. That was what she had been taught to say. "I am no one. It was nothing." He went very still, and in the rising light, between them in the snow, something began to happen. Wren felt it first as heat in her wrist, not the warmth of his body, a heat from inside her own skin, sharp and bright and growing. She gasped and pulled her good arm against her chest, and she watched, in horror and then in wonder, as a mark rose to the surface of her wrist, a mark where there had never been one before. It came up through the skin like frost spreading across a window, silver white, shaped like nothing she knew, a crescent moon cradled in a ring of fine frost lines, and it burned and it glowed. She could no more stop it than she could stop the sun. The man made a sound she would never forget, a sound of pure shock, ripped out of a creature she would later learn, shocked at nothing. He seized her wrist, gently, so gently for such a huge ruined hand. He turned it to the light and stared at the silver mark blooming there. His golden eyes went wide, and his ruined voice fell to almost nothing. "That is not possible," he breathed. "That mark died out. That bloodline died out. 40 winters gone. What is it? She said, frightened now. What is happening to me? What did I do? He looked from the mark to her face and back, as though he were reading two halves of the same impossible word. And when he spoke again, it was slow and careful, like a man stepping out onto ice he could not believe would hold. Do you know who I am? He asked. No, she said. Truly. I thought you were a wild wolf. I thought no one would miss you. I am sorry, I did not mean any. I am Kade Nightriver, he said. The name fell on her like the snow off a bent branch, all at once and cold. Every wolf in the Northern Territories knew that name. They swore by it. They were judged by it. And in the lean, dark places like Hollowfrost, they half forgot to fear it. Kade Nightriver, the Alpha King, the lord of all the packs from the high pines to the sea. His hall was carved into the mountain at the heart of the world. His word was law over the very people who had named her disposable and sent her out to die. She had lain in the snow all night. She had sung the Alpha King back to life. She had pressed her dead mother's shawl to his wounds. And she had done it all believing he was a beast no one would miss. No, she said, because it was easier than believing. No, the king does not. The king is in his hall. The king is... The king was poisoned, Kade said, and his voice went hard and cold with an old fury. The king was given silver in his cup by a hand he trusted, and when the poison took him and locked him in his wolf form, that same hand drove him out into the wild. The same hand set silver traps along the trap lines where the disposable ones are sent, so that when I dragged myself there starving, I would find iron and silver waiting. 6 weeks I have been a beast in the snow. 6 weeks I have crawled this country dying, and in my hall a usurper sits in my chair and tells my people their king is dead. He looked at her, and the fury gentled into something that frightened her far more. And on the last night, the cold finally came to take me, and the lowest creature in all my kingdom lay down in the snow and would not let it. He lifted her marked wrist and looked at the silver crescent and the ring of frost. This is the Frostmoon mark, he said softly. The Frostmoon line were the old kings before the Nightrivers, the moon-blooded. They were said to have power over the cold itself, the power to still a raging wolf without spilling a drop of blood. They were betrayed and slaughtered 40 winters ago. Everyone, root and branch, everyone. The whole world believes the line is ash. His golden eyes came up to hers, wet and burning. But it is not ash. It is here. It is in you. The blood the murderers thought they had ended ran down into the lowest omega of the lowest pack, hidden in plain sight, where no one would ever look for a queen. And the mark only wakes, little one. The mate mark only wakes for the one whose mercy your soul answers. He pressed his brow to her broken hand. This huge ruined king kneeling in the snow before a starving girl, and his shoulders shook. You stayed for a beast you thought was nothing, he said, and you are the lost moon queen of the oldest blood in the world, and by every law of fate and frost, Wren. For he had her name now, she had given it to him in the night without knowing. You are mine, and I am yours, and I will spend the rest of my life making this world answer for what it did to you. Wren knelt in the snow, her hand broken, her wrist alight, the Alpha King weeping over her fingers, and she understood. The cruel, ordinary world that had named her disposable had just come entirely apart, in a single night. She did not feel like a queen. She felt like a girl who had to get home to her brother before they decided what to do with him. But somewhere far down, beneath the fear and the disbelief and the cold, her mother's last words turned over and woke. There is a moon in your blood, Wren. Bow to no one. For the first time in her life she began, very slowly, to wonder if it might be true. They came out of the pines in the full light of morning, the Alpha King and the Omega, and the first thing Wren said was not about herself at all. My brother, she said. Bram. He is in the Packlands. He is deaf. He cannot shift. They said they would deal with him as they saw fit if I did not come back. Please, whatever you are, whatever I am, get him out of there first. Kade Nightriver looked down at her. She was holding his good arm to steady him. He was still half poisoned, weak as a colt. the great king leaning on the smallest of his subjects, and something in his ruined face eased. "Of course your first thought is the boy," he said. "Of course it is." He shook his head slowly. "They will not touch a hair of him. You have my word, and you will learn soon enough what my word is worth." He lifted his head and let out a sound she felt in her chest more than heard, a low, rolling call that rang through the frozen trees, and within the hour they came, 5 wolves out of the white, lean and hard and fast. At their head, a tawny warrior with a captain's bearing. He took one look at the gaunt, half-naked man leaning on a starveling girl, and he fell to his knees in the snow so fast he sank to his thighs. "My king," the captain said, and his voice broke clean in half. "My king, you are alive. We searched. We never stopped. They told the packs you were dead, and we never once believed it." "Soren," said Kade, and there was a whole friendship in the word. "Up. We have no time for kneeling. The kingdom thinks me dead. A traitor sits my chair. And there is a boy in the Hollowfrost lands I have promised this woman I would keep safe. That is the first order I give you on my return. The boy first. Always the boy first." The captain, Soren Vale, rose, and only then did he truly look at Wren, at the broken hand cradled to her chest, at the silver mark glowing faint on her wrist, at the grey shawl bound around his king's silver-eaten arm. She watched the understanding move across his face in stages. This ragged girl had been the one, and then she watched him do something no one had ever done to her in her whole life. He bowed to her, a captain of the king's guard bowing to the disposable one. "Lady," he said, "we are in your debt past any paying." "I am not a lady," Wren said, the words automatic, the shrinking automatic. "I am an omega. I am no one. You are the one who stayed," Soren said simply, as if that settled every question worth asking, and she found she had no answer for it. What followed, Wren would remember for the rest of her life in pieces too bright to hold all at once. The wolves took Hollowfrost without a single drop of blood. They did not have to fight. They simply walked into the Packlands with the living king at their centre, and the lie that he was dead died with one look at his face. Delavane went grey and silent in her fine fur cloak. The truth of who she had sent to the traps came clear. Wren did not look at her. She walked straight through the pack that had used her every day of her life, through warriors who had stepped over her like a stain. Not one of them met her eyes now. She went to the grain shed. She pulled open the warped door, and she dropped to her knees. "Bram," she signed with her one good hand. "Bram, I am here. I came back." He flew into her so hard he knocked her into the snow. She held him with her broken hand, screaming, and did not care. She felt him shaking with the sobs he could not hear himself making, and over his shoulder she watched the Alpha King of the Northern Territories stand in the doorway of a grain shed. She watched him look at the place where the two of them had been kept, at the warped boards, at the tin pan, at the one threadbare blanket and the cold. And she watched his golden eyes go to flint. "Who put a child here?" Kade said, very quietly. "Who put any living soul here?" No one answered. Everyone knew. He crossed the snow and crouched down to Bram's level. This enormous, frightening man. Wren tensed, but Kade only waited until the boy looked at him. Then he lifted his own hands and signed. Slow and clumsy, but unmistakable. Wren's breath stopped. He knew the hand speech, roughly, like a man who had learned it long ago for someone he loved. But he knew it. "You kept her warm," Kade signed to her brother. "She told me. All those cold nights. You are a good brother. The best I have heard of." Bram stared at him, and then at Wren. He signed, frantic. "Who is he?" And Wren laughed and cried at once. She signed back the only true thing she could think of. "He is the one I saved, and it turns out he is the king." They went north the next day, and that journey was the second life of Wren Ashdown. The king's hall was carved into the heart of the mountain, vast and warm, lit gold with fire and hung with banners. The first time she walked into it, she stopped in the doorway and could not make herself go further. She did not believe a place like that would let someone like her stand inside it. Kade put his hand at the small of her back, gentle as a question, and he walked her in. What happened to her in the days that followed undid years of cold in hours. They drew her a bath in hot water, so much hot water that she wept in it. They washed the labour and the grime of a lifetime out of her hair. They wrapped her broken hand properly, splintered and bound by the king's own healers, and the pain ebbed for the first time since the trap. They put her in clean, warm clothes that fit, clothes made for a person, and not handed down through a dozen poorer ones. They sat her at a long table and put food in front of her. Real food, hot bread and rich stew and more than she could eat. From old habit, she tried to push half of it aside to save for her brother. Then she looked up. Bram already had his own plate piled high. A serving woman fussed over whether he wanted more. The boy was eating with both hands and his eyes were huge. "You will never be cold again, little Omega," Kade said to her that first night. They stood at a high window while the snow fell on a valley that was warm and lit and his. "Not while I draw breath, and neither will he. I swear it on a crown I am about to take back." She did not know how to hold a promise that large. So she held the edge of the window, and she let herself, for one moment, believe it. The king's people took her in as though they had been waiting for her. Lady Kade Nightriver, the king's aunt, came to Wren's rooms on the second day. A tall, grieving woman. She had lost a niece to the same poisonous malice and worn black for a year. Wren braced for scorn. Surely the royal kin would see an Omega and sneer. Instead, the old woman took Wren's marked wrist in both her hands. She looked at the silver crescent, and she began, quietly, to cry. "Frostmoon," she whispered, "after all these years. Child, do you know what you are?" She gathered Wren against her, as though she was something precious and breakable, and Wren could not remember the last time anyone had held her who was not Bram. She stood stiff, then slowly, she let herself be held. Soren and the guard adopted her in their rougher way. They taught Bram to play the stone and bone games of the barracks. They shouted and laughed in a way the boy could feel through the floor. One young guard took to following the boy everywhere like a worried older brother. He signed his clumsy 3 words of hand speech over and over until Bram took pity and taught him more. They teased their king without mercy now that he was alive to be teased, about being found half-naked in a ditch, about being outfought by a snowdrift, about needing a starving Omega half his size to carry him home. Kade bore it all with a dry patience, and that told Wren more than any speech how loved he was. And in the quiet, away from the hall, the king who was thunder to his people was something else entirely to her. He sat with her by the fire and asked her about her mother and her brother and the lullaby, and he listened, actually listened, leaning in, as though her small cold life were a thing worth knowing. He told her about his own losses, about the sister the poisoner had taken, about the loneliness of a crown. He never once touched her without asking, and the mate mark on her wrist warmed whenever he was near, a quiet, steady heat. The bond between them deepened night by night. It became something she had stopped flinching from and started reaching toward. It was Maeve Thorne who put words to what was growing in her. The old healer had come north too, summoned by the king himself when Wren spoke her name. Maeve took Wren's marked wrist on the first night. She laughed a cracked laugh. "I knew," she said. "The day I bound your burn, I saw the frost in your veins. I have waited 2 winters to see if I would live long enough to watch it wake. Then you will teach me," Wren said, "what I am, what I can do." "I will teach you," Maeve said, and her milky eyes were sharp. "Because the one who poisoned the king has not given up, child. He will come for you both, and when he does, you will not save this kingdom by humming a lullaby. You will save it by becoming what your blood has always been." Wren looked down at the silver mark glowing on her wrist, and for the first time, the fear in her was not the old fear of being seen. It was the new and stranger fear of being, at last, exactly what they would have to reckon with. The usurper's name was Var Coldridge, and he was the king's own cousin. Wren learned the shape of the treachery over those weeks in the mountain hall. The more she learned, the colder it sat in her. Var Coldridge was acting regent. He was the smooth and titled man who had stood at Kade's right hand. He had poured Kade's cups. He had worn his concern like a fine coat. It was his hand that had laced the king's wine with silver. It was his order that had driven the poisoned king out into the wild. It was his order that had salted the trap lines with silver jaws. And it was his voice, these 6 weeks that had stood in the Grand Council Hall, his voice that told the assembled packs of the Northern Territories, with grave and practised sorrow, that their beloved king was dead, his voice that said the crown must pass regretfully to the nearest blood, to himself. He was 3 days from being crowned when word reached him that Kade Nightriver was alive. Wren saw what that news did, second-hand, through Soren. A lesser traitor would have run. Var Coldridge doubled down. He could not let the king reach the council alive. A living Kade meant Var's own head on a spike, so he sent killers north along the mountain road to finish what the silver had started, and he sent them not only for the king. His spies had brought back word of the silver mark on an Omega's wrist, so he sent them for Wren too, because Var Coldridge knew his history. He knew what the Frostmoon mark meant. His own grandfather had been among the men who slaughtered the moon-blooded 40 winters ago to clear the way for Nightriver rule. And now here was the line risen again, in a starving girl. A living Frostmoon queen was a claim that could unmake everything his family had stolen. She was not just the king's mate to him. She was the last loose thread of the murder his blood had built its power on, and he meant to cut it. They came on a black night, with the council only days away. Wren was woken by the bond. The mark on her wrist flared white-hot. A warning screamed up her arm an instant before the first crash sounded in the hall. She was on her feet in the dark, her heart in her throat. Her first thought, her only thought, was Bram. She ran for his room. What followed was the longest night of her life. It was the night she stopped being the one they sent out to die. The killers were inside the mountain. The bond had given the warning a breath too late. The corridors were full of the sounds of fighting. Soren's voice roaring orders, the clash and snarl of wolves in the dark. Wren reached Bram's room and found him awake and terrified, signing into the black where he could see nothing. She gathered him behind her and turned to face the door. And into the doorway came a wolf the colour of old blood, with a killer's flat eyes. She had nowhere left to run. And there it was, the dark moment, the disposable one cornered, with the thing she loved most behind her, and no king coming through the door to save her. Kade was 3 corridors away, fighting for his own life. Soren was bleeding. The guards were scattered. There was no one but her. The way it had always, in the end, been no one but her. The old Wren would have bared her throat. The old Wren would have shrunk. "I am done," she said out loud, into the dark, to the killer, and to the whole cruel world that had made her. "I am done being the one they send out to die." And she stopped holding it down. The thing Maeve had spent these weeks teaching her to find. The cold she had been taught to fear all her life, the frost in her blood. She had thought of it as weakness. It was not weakness. It was power. The old moon power of a murdered line. The power to still a raging wolf without spilling a single drop of blood. She had carried it cowed inside her since the day she was born, because the world had told her every single day that she was nothing. She raised her unbroken hand. The silver mark blazed, and she let the cold come out of her. It rolled off her in a wave she could see, a breath of pure white frost. The killing winter she had survived 100 times, now made into a thing she wielded rather than endured. It struck the blood-coloured wolf in the doorway and stopped him where he stood. It did not kill him, it did not break him. It only stilled him, his snarl frozen, his flat eyes wide, his raised legs locked, as though the whole of winter had laid one finger on him and said, "Be still." She held him there, this huge killer, with the cold of her own blood, and she felt no fear at all, only a vast and steady calm. Behind her, she felt Bram's hand fist in the back of her clothes. Safe. That was how Kade found her. Bloodied, battered, having torn his way through 3 corridors of killers to reach her room. Certain he would find her dead, and instead he found his lost Omega standing tall in the doorway, frost pouring off her wrist, an assassin frozen helpless at her feet, her deaf brother safe behind her back. He stopped in the corridor and stared at her. His ruined gold eyes shone. "You did not need me," he said, wonder and grief and pride all at once. "I had myself," she said, and her voice did not shake. It was the strangest thing she had ever heard come out of her own mouth. For the first time, it is enough. They beat the killers back before dawn. Soren took a wound that would scar but not kill him. One young guard wept over it more than the captain did. The blood-coloured wolf and the 2 others left alive were taken in chains. And in the morning, broken and exhausted and clean of the old fear at last, Wren learned that Var Coldridge had overplayed his hand. The attack on the king's own hall, on the eve of the council. Witnesses living to name the wolves as Coldridge men. It was no longer Kade's word against his cousins. It was proof. Kade came to her as the sun rose over the valley. He took her marked wrist in his huge scarred hands, the wrist that had frozen a killer in his tracks, and he did not give her an order, the way kings give orders. He gave her a choice. "The council gathers in 3 days," he said. "Every pack of the Northern Territories, the ones who knelt to Var, the ones who named you disposable, all of them, in one hall. I will unmask my cousin before them, and I will take back my crown." He paused. "And I want you beside me when I do it, not behind me, hidden, the saved Omega the king is fond of. Beside me, as what you are." "I do not know what I am," she said. "You are the last Frostmoon queen, and you are the woman I am bonded to, and you are the strongest soul in this kingdom," he said. "Stand beside me, Wren, not behind me. Rule with me or not at all. I will not have you as a kept thing in a warm room. I will have you as my equal, my queen, the partner of my whole reign. Or I will let you go free and rich and safe, to live whatever life you choose, and I will mourn you every day of it, but I will not cage you, not even in gold. You have been caged enough." Wren looked at the king who had handed a starving Omega the choice no one had ever given her, the choice to refuse, and she understood that this was the thing she had never had, more than the bath or the food or the warm hall. Not rescue, sovereignty over her own life. She did not bare her throat. She did not shrink. "I will stand beside you," she said, "and then we are going to put an end to the trap lines, and to every cruelty like them in every pack you rule. That is my price. That is the only crown I want." Kade Nightriver, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, smiled at her for the first time with his whole ruined face. "Done," he said, "spoken like a queen." 3 days, Wren thought, looking north toward the gathering of all the packs that had ever looked through her. 3 days until they all had to look at her at last. The Grand Council Hall of the King's Hall could hold 1,000 wolves. On the day of the reckoning, it held more. Every pack of the Northern Territories had sent its alphas and its elders. Var Coldridge himself had summoned them to witness his crowning. They filled the great stone hall beneath its vaulted dark, banner upon banner, the proud and the powerful of the whole kingdom, and at the front of them all, in the regent's chair that was not his, sat Var Coldridge. He wore robes trimmed with silver, smooth and titled and certain, 3 breaths from the throne he had murdered for. Wren walked into that hall on the arm of a dead man. That was how it looked to the assembled packs. The king, they had been told, was dead, alive, walking the length of the council hall in the full light, scarred and gaunt and unmistakably Kade Nightriver. The sound that went through the crowd was like a wind through pines. Var Coldridge came to his feet, his face the colour of ash, and for one instant Wren watched a lifetime of smooth control fail him completely. But it was not Var the pack stared at longest. It was the woman on the king's arm. She wore no fur and no gold she had not earned, a plain dark gown, the grey shawl of her dead mother folded at her shoulder, and on her wrist, bare for all of them to see, the silver Frostmoon crescent burned bright as a struck coin. She did not bare her throat to a single soul in that hall. She walked the length of it with her chin level, her broken hand healed, her unbroken one open at her side, and somewhere in the crowd Della Vane of the Hollowfrost Pack made a small choked sound, because she knew that face. She had sent that face out to die. Kade did not raise his voice. He did not have to. He stood before the assembled kingdom and told them plainly what had been done, the silver in his cup, the hand that poured it. The 6 weeks a poisoned king had crawled the wild, while a traitor wore his authority and told his people he was dead. He named the trap lines. He named the silver jaws set to finish him. And then he turned to his cousin. He asked him to deny it before them all, in the low, plain voice of a man who already had the truth. Var Coldridge did not deny it well. He tried. He was a creature of words, and he reached for them. Contempt and dismissal, the old weapons, a poisoned king's fever dream, a starving Omega's lie. Where was the proof? But the proof walked into the hall on Soren Vale's order. The assassins, taken alive in the king's own corridors 3 nights past. Coldridge men to the last. Under the eyes of 1,000 witnesses, they named the cousin who had sent them. The proof was the silver trap itself. They carried it in and set it down on the stone before the council, its jaws still dark with the king's dried blood. The proof was the grey shawl on Wren's shoulder, the wound it had bound, the mark on her wrist that no living soul could have forged. And then Var Coldridge, cornered at last, did the thing that cowards do under power. He lunged, not for the king who could best him, but for the Omega he still thought was the weakest thing in the room. His hand went to a silver knife beneath his robes. Wren did not flinch, and Kade did not have to move. She raised her marked hand and let the cold come. It rolled across the council hall in a breath of white frost. It struck Var Coldridge and stopped him where he stood, the knife frozen a hand's width from her, his snarl locked on his smooth face, his whole stolen power stilled by the one bloodline his family had thought they wiped from the world. She held him there before every pack of the Northern Territories. She did not kill him. She did not spill one drop of his blood. She only held him helpless in the winter of her own veins, for all of them to see exactly who had been the weak one all along. "I am the daughter of the line your blood tried to murder," she said, and her clear voice carried to the back of the hall. 40 winters you thought us ash. We were not ash. We were waiting. She let the frost ease. The guards took him, unfrozen and shaking, stripped of every shred of the dignity he had stolen. "Take him where he sent his king," she said. "The cold teaches what mercy cannot." Var Coldridge was condemned that day before the whole kingdom. His titles struck, his treachery witnessed by every pack he had lied to, destroyed not in a dark corridor, but in the full public light of the hall he had meant to be crowned in. And Della Vane of the Hollowfrost Pack was called to answer for the Omega she had sent to the traps. She got her own smaller reckoning before her betters, stripped of her rank as head Omega, her cruelty named aloud, sent to do, for a season, the very labour she had spent a lifetime forcing onto the lowest. Wren did not gloat over either of them. She found she did not need to. The looking was enough. And then, in the same hall, in the same hour, justice turned to its other face. Lady Ilsa Nightriver came forward in her widow's black, the king's grieving aunt, the royal kin. Before all the assembled packs she took Wren's marked wrist in both her hands. She raised it high, so every wolf in the kingdom could see the silver crescent burning there. "This is no rescued Omega," she said, her old voice ringing. "This is the last queen of the Frostmoon line, the moon blood the killers could not kill, the one whose mercy raised our king from the dead. She is the blood of kings, and she is more than her blood. She is the truest heart I have known, and I, who lost a daughter of this house to the same hand that poisoned my king, claim her now before you all as a daughter of it. She is family, she is ours. Let any wolf who would call her less stand and say so to me." Not one wolf stood. They knelt instead. The whole hall, pack by pack, alpha by alpha, the proud and the powerful of the Northern Territories, the ones who had named her disposable. They went down onto the stone before the starving Omega they had sent out to die, now risen as the lost queen of the oldest blood in the world. Wren stood in the centre of that kneeling kingdom, her mother's shawl on her shoulder, and she could not breathe. Maeve Thorne brought the circlet forward on a cloth. The smiths had forged it from the silver trap itself, the very jaws that had held the king dying in the snow, melted down and remade. The instrument of betrayal turned into a crown of frost silver. fine as woven ice, set with the crescent of the Frostmoon line. Kade took it from the cloth and turned to her, and the whole kingdom watched its king do what no Nightriver had done in 40 winters. He set a Frostmoon crown upon a Frostmoon head. "Stand beside me," he said, "only for her," though the hall heard every word. "Not behind me." He set the cold silver circlet on her brow. "Rule with me, Wren Ashdown of the Frostmoon line, for as long as the snow falls and after. Be my queen, my equal, the partner of my whole reign." He took her healed hand in his scarred one. "Forever, and the cold never touches you again." "Forever," she said, and in the front of the kneeling hall, in a place of honour, stood a deaf, wolfless boy of 9 winters. Once he would have been called a waste of the food he ate. Now he watched his sister be crowned, and he signed with both hands where she could see him, the only word that mattered: "Mine. That is my sister. Mine." Wren looked at her brother, safe and warm and seen at last. She looked at the king who had given her not a cage but a crown. She looked at the kingdom kneeling at her feet, and she did not feel like the disposable one any more. She did not feel like no one. She put her hand to the frost-silver circle on her brow, forged from the trap that was meant to kill, and she made the kingdom a vow that would outlast her. "The trap lines end today," she said. "No wolf of mine will ever again be sent out to die because someone decided they were worth less than the rest. Not the lowest omega, not the wolfless child, not anyone. In my reign, the weak are not the ones we spend. The weak are the ones we keep." 2 winters later, the snow still fell on the northern territories, but it fell on a kingdom that had changed. The killing trap lines were gone, abolished by royal law in the first season of the new reign. The silver jaws gathered out of the high pines and melted down to nothing. The grain shed at the edge of the Hollowfrost land stood empty. No one was kept in it now. Wren Ashdown was 11 winters old now, grown a hand taller. He had a place and a voice in the Queen's reforms, for it was Wren who had insisted the wolfless and the deaf and the lowest be heard in the making of the new laws, and it was Bram who carried their voice. He signed swift and certain in the warm council hall, a translator at his side. A young guard had learned every word of the hand speech and stood grinning at his back. He signed happily now, the boy who had been called a waste. He was safe. He had never once been cold again. The silver trap that had nearly killed a king hung melted into the crown on the Queen's own brow, and in the high warm rooms of the King's Hall, on the coldest night of that winter, the snow fell thick and harmless. It fell on a valley that was lit and warm and theirs. Kade Nightriver sat by a great fire, a small new weight in her arms, a daughter, dark-haired, gold-eyed. The bond between the Frostmoon and the Nightriver lines made into a sleeping child. The snow that had once buried a starving omega in a poacher's pit fell now against the windows of a hall that belonged to her. It could not touch them, and it never would again. She began, under her breath, to hum. It was the old omega lullaby, the small, poor song for nobodies, the one her mother had sung over her, the one she had hummed all through a killing night to sing a stranger back to life. She sang it now to a daughter who would never know hunger, never know the cold, never once in all her life be called disposable. The same song. The whole world turned around it, from the trap pit to the throne. Kade came and stood behind her chair. He laid his scarred hands on her shoulders and listened. The king who had heard that song in the dark of death itself and followed it home. "They said the weak are sent to die," he said quietly, into her hair. "She made the weak the ones we keep," said Wren, and she did not stop her song. Outside, the snow came down on the warm and lighted hall. Inside, the lullaby went on, and nothing in that kingdom was disposable ever again. No one. Not the lowest omega, not the wolfless child, not the smallest sleeping soul by the fire.